This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now on the Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre through Isotope, RX, and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
Some of the things that worked for me was, my enthusiasm and passion for this stuff. So especially in my earlier days of being an apprentice engineer and assistant and all that, spent countless hours doing some of the things we've already talked about, experiments. And then later when I'm doing something that is, we're on the clock, we got to make fast decisions and everything, I've developed a toolbox. I think that's important.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. The Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre provides unequaled headroom and linear output regardless of transient audio peaks, capturing critical details from your microphone. The 100 series amplifiers were used by Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, and the Record Plant on records by ZZ Top, Aerosmith, and John Lennon. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio at spectra1964.com or call them at 801-797-0642. In my studio, I've got the Mac Mini M1 paired up with the OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution to connect to all my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Bob Bullock, a recording engineer, mixer, and producer whose credits can be found on over 50 gold and platinum albums. He loves to work with independent artists from around the world also and does extensive teaching through multiple universities, including Belmont University and the Art Institute in Nashville, Tennessee, and Troy University in Montgomery, Alabama. Bob has also been a guest on the podcast previously, way back on episode 55, where he shared his story of starting out and working his way to Nashville. Today, we just want to catch up with Bob, see what's new in the studio, talk about mixing and using some of the tools he's using and some of the recent projects, and also talk about his beautiful Phantom Focus Mixroom, which I am proud to say I have in my studio now as well, and talk about mixing in Pro Tools. So thanks so much again to Carl Tatz for reconnecting us for this interview. Please welcome back Bob Bullock to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bob, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I am.
Great to have you back, dude. And I like to reveal this to the podcast listeners. The Herculean efforts we go through sometimes just to get started on this and getting all our little microphones hooked up and everything. So thank you so much for jumping through a bunch of hoops for this Skype call.
It's my pleasure. We learn with every experience, so I figured out a simpler way to do this myself now.
Yeah, I feel like you're one of the people I would have met and talked to who would have had stories about, like I would have been the young guy in the studio, pulling my hair out like this, oh no, something didn't work before the session. And then you would have walked in and been like, it'll be fine. Well, happens. There's always something that you got to fix in the studio.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, that's one thing. If there's anything I've improved on over the years is patience. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean that was a real takeaway. It's like the more you do this stuff, the more you realize that our whole job is based on fixing something, right?
Yeah,
we're always fixing something. So why get stressed about it? Just get started.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you for doing all this because your voice sounds awesome right now. What are you using, by the way? Tell Rox. This is the one podcast where you can actually talk about something geeky like that and everybody wants to know.
Okay. Well, I just plugged in an SM57 that I normally use as a talkback mic and thought I'd just, connect that up to go direct into Skype here and through my links converters. And it seems to be working fine.
Very cool. Are those sort of newer links converters, or are these older ones that have, proven the test of time?
They're older ones. I'm a fan of links for sure. These are the Aurora 16s, and I've had them for a number of years. They've never failed me. They've certainly come up, with, a new version, with more features. And I'm sure it's, every bit as good, but I've just been so satisfied with these for what I use them for that I have elected not to upgrade.
Now, is that one of those things where you get a card for the back and then it plugs directly into a Pro Tools HDX card or an HD card, for example?
Yes. Yeah. Now what I'm doing is I'm running Pro Tools native here, and I'm also running Nuendo. Okay.
Oh, cool.
So most of my mixing, by the way, I'm actually really doing in Nuendo. I've been a Nuendo user for a number of years. So I've got really Nuendo, Cubase, and Pro Tools native, in my system. And so, the links, it's just a card in my chassis and an AS16 card. And
that talks to the links module.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, cool. Right on. Nuendo is something I remember hearing a lot about. I know people really swore by it. There's sort of like a bit of a comedy routine, ancient duel, feud between mixing in Nuendo versus Pro Tools going back in time in Nashville. But I do know people that are making a lot of records in Cubase too. Is Nuendo pretty similar to Cubase as far as how it operates and stuff?
It is. In fact, I started with Nuendo way back. I mean, it was version 1 point something, I think. I mean, so it was way back. And at that time, I couldn't really even tell you what year that was. I mean, but it goes back.
Was it BC or AD?
Yeah, it was AD, fortunately. But I think at that time, Cubase was a little more of a basic DAW, okay? And maybe geared for... maybe just, the help with the songwriter. And Nuendo is really the flagship, okay? So what's happened over the years, the way I've seen it, and I even have a pretty recent version of Cubase, is Nuendo still continues to be kind of the flagship, and especially for really complex stuff, film work and all that. But Cubase now is really all I mean, for what I do, Cubase does it all, okay? I just haven't really gotten away from Nuendo because at this point it's just, a simple upgrade. So what tends to happen is Steinberg, which is a Yamaha company, now anyway, they'll come out with a new Cubase, and I think there's another one coming out, I think in this spring or summer. And then it'll have a lot of great features and improvements. And then just probably a few months after that, they'll go to the next level of Nuendo, and it will have all those features and then some others, Mm-hmm. So it's kind of been this, some people probably really need the Nuendo system. I know for what I do, for mixing in my own studio and everything, Cubase does it all. It's a less expensive program, but they're just very similar.
Yeah. Well, I have a good friend, Chris Salim, over at a YouTube channel called Mixdown Online, and he specifically teaches in Cubase, and it's fun to see that. And I've known some people here who really swear by all the creative production features that come in and everything. So it's cool stuff.
Yeah. And I'm not, I mean, I'm a fan of Pro Tools also, but the way I would describe how I ended up with Nuendo, and I said even before they really ramped Cubase up, is, Pro Tools, avid with Pro Tools. I mean, it really, was the startup of working, this way with a DAW. And so it's done. I think Avid's done a really good job of in recent years especially, really improving on the system. But when Steinberg came out with Cubase and then Nuendo and everything, they were able to play a leapfrog and kind of really jump forward on a lot of features.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, some other DAWs have too. Like I said, I don't really care at this point to really venture out, any further than what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt that, well, like I said, I really started with Nuendo. It really had jumped ahead on a lot of features, and it took a while for Avid to be able to go back and build those into Pro Tools. So again, I feel now, these DAWs are very similar. It's getting more and more of like what you're used to. But part of my reason of going into what Steinberg was doing with Nuendo and Cubase is it was more familiar to me as far as when I opened up the DAW, the mixer had a lot of built-in things, built-in EQ, built-in effects, things that kind of came up kind of like a more conventional desk always did for me, like an SSL, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of helped me right away with my speed and workflow. And I still like that. I mean, I still like a lot of the things that, Nuendo, and I have to say Nuendo and Cubase, because like I said, it's the same company and, very similar now. It's just been a real comfortable way for me to work. Although on occasion, I'll mix something for someone that they've gotten so deep into a Pro Tools session that it's actually made sense for me to continue their project in using my Pro Tools, because for me to start over and go into another DAW would just take way too much time.
Yeah, so that's a cool topic to talk about too. We will circle back for sure and talk about the importance of mixing efficiently and quickly and being able to move around fast. But let me ask you a question about mixing in Pro Tools and getting a session from somebody. I've experienced this myself in my own world where I start a project and it's, it's got a balance going on. We've been doing overdubs like that. I've done a rough mix that I have gotten a little bit excited about. And then I go into mix mode and I think, okay, now I'm going to mix it. And I've done the classic move where I strip all the plugin settings out and I start all over again. And then I'm rebuilding it and I arrive at the end of like hours and hours of work. And I'm like, I really know I've nailed it this time, and then I leave the studio and I come back later and I listen to the rough mix versus my intentional all day mix in the car. And my all day mix just sounds pathetic against the rough mix, which just sounds really exciting. So I guess part of my question is, one of the things I've tried to do is figure out like, well, what is the strategy for continuing a mix in Pro Tools where it's already got some identity to it? And I'll turn it over to you, but I started exploring ways of saying, okay, maybe I like things about my template, but maybe I want to, keep what was already started in the mix precious, and then I'm running that into my template somehow. And do you have ways that you find that it's really useful to pick up where somebody left off that maybe could be good takeaways for us?
Well, I have to say that is kind of a rare situation. I mean, I did bring it up, but it is a bit of a rare occurrence, mm-hmm. because the way I started in engineering and mixing, way back with analog desk, analog tape, all that it was pretty much a routine that you would work, all day on a project, and then the board would get zeroed out, and if you came back, another day, someone was working there in between you, or maybe even, after you in the evening or something, you came back and all the faders were down and everything was zeroed out, and you put your tape back up and you started over. And sometimes just out of, just memory, you kind of get quicker and quicker as I worked on a project. I would get quicker at probably pretty things pretty close back on the board to where they were, maybe EQs I remember that I had put in for monitoring or something.
Yeah.
But mixing, in those days, mixing really was a start over. And if we had rough mixes, and that's kind of a point. I always made a point of not making really good rough mixes, or not spending a lot of time on them. I'll put it that way. Sometimes they came out better than you thought, but I didn't spend a lot of time, so that I felt that I could probably easily get back to that and hopefully beat it, But I guess even today, the way I mix, most people send me files, and even if they've had a Cubase session or a Pro Tool session, sometimes they don't send that to me at all, or if they do, all I really need is the consolidated WAV files, and I just start over, going into my Nuendo. Now, where I said that about Pro Tools is there have been some times when a project has been so dense and people had so many things going on inside the session that I've thought, even if I undo some stuff, I need to really kind of start where they're handing it to me. And that's really only happened a couple times. And then that way, I say, okay, I better just stay in Pro Tools and I better work with it from then. Because, we're talking today, sometimes, I get songs with, 120, 130 files, so wow. That gets pretty complicated. Now, if someone sends me just, say 60 or 40 or whatever, WAV files, then I just start with a fresh template in Nuendo and I start mixing as if I was just looking at a SSL desk that was zeroed out.
Now, are you familiar with Stereo Monoizer, the app?
No, I'm not.
It's pretty cool. It's one that can be useful for those times where people send you a whole bunch of multi-tracks, but every track is stereo because it's been bounced out through the stereo bus, so you get a stereo kick drum and a stereo snare track and all that. And you can load all those files in first, and it will essentially determine which ones are mono, which ones are actually mono, but just pan to one side or not, which ones are actually stereo. And then you can approve it, and then it reprocesses and creates a whole folder of files where all the mono tracks are mono and all the stereo tracks are stereo, and then you can load them in and build from there. Anyway, we were talking about it recently on the last episode.
Yeah, I need that. In fact, I'm going to write it down when the sessions are. Yeah, I need it because generally what I do is I'm usually contacting my client, and because it depends on the DAW they're using, or maybe they don't have a lot of experience consolidating files. And I'll get back in touch and I'll say, look, what I really need is for you to give me just a mono track of all the mono, instruments. Yeah. And then if you give me a stereo synthesizer or a stereo piano, then I realize that was intended to be a left and a right channel. But yeah, I don't need like two mono kicks and two mono snares and all that together. So yeah, that's a tool I will definitely use.
Yeah, Stereo Monoizer.
Okay.
I'm looking at the name as we talk too. But Soundizers, I guess that's the one. Yeah,
okay.
Soundizers. So pretty cool tool. It takes a couple of minutes to kind of learn and understand how it functions, and you do have to click the OK button in a few places so that you don't mess up everything, but it's very, very handy. I guess we don't have to stay on this topic since you said you haven't had a lot of people sending it like this, but for me, the way to move forward with the mix and hold on to what was there was to try and move forward in mixing by saying, all right, I'm going to start exactly where the mix left off, and then just, additively, like add a few things, like add parallels or engage the stereo mix bus processing and things like that, rather than undoing any of the plugins that were on a track already. Want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope RX and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, EQ, and limiting on this podcast episode. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place, but setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always someone in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Samply.app makes it easy to add collaborators to a project so that the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music. Just upload a voice memo or song and start commenting. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Samply.app or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. Anyway, we can move on to another part of that topic. Talk a little bit about your mix room. You know what? Before we even go there, can I bring something else up?
Yeah, and I actually want to make one comment even on just our previous topic.
Please,
here.
yeah, please.
But what else did you want to bring up?
Before this, you and I were chatting, and you had mentioned that you really appreciated Bob Clearmountain's work in your, in your career. And I think I remember Bob talking about that where he was saying, like, you'd get to the end of the session, you'd be like, hey guys, can we put a little extra time to do a rough mix of this session? And I thought it was really funny that you just said, that like these divergent approaches to the rough mix. It's great.
Well, yeah, and I should probably clarify that too, because there's one part about that maybe a little bit of a contradiction, but on my own projects that I'm producing, I guess that's what I need to clarify. There's a couple things that might connect some dots here. On my own projects that I produce, I always record them in Pro Tools. Okay, mm-hmm. Now that's because I don't have a portable Nuendo system that I want to bring around. And there's actually a couple of things that connect here with me saying that. Some of it's intentional. So if I work on a project that I'm producing and engineering, and we do it all in Pro Tools, yes, I'm making rough mixes and all that. But when I come back to my studio for mixing, I do the same thing that I'm doing with other clients. I consolidate all the Pro Tools files and then create a Nuendo session, and it's a start over for me, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, the reason that I find that beneficial for the way that I work, and it's maybe something, because I've been doing this for several decades now, is it does allow me to just get a fresh, clean start mixing, and I don't feel like I'm limiting myself to what I got used to, because there's a lot of ways to do this, of course, but if I'm recording and building a session, to me there's a little bit of a burn in, like a camera burning in to a scene or something, where my brain just can't even get away from where it is now. So I prefer to start over. I mean, I really do. I prefer to just go into mixing, starting over. Now, if I'm engineering for other people, okay, and my theory has always been do the best possible rough mix you could do for everybody, because, that's how you prove yourself. I mean, that's how you get work. I mean, if you're doing some overdubs for someone, and and at the end of the night, you make a great rough mix for them, that may get you the mixing gig. Yeah. So I kind of was saying that on my own stuff that I produce, I do very quick rough mixes so I don't get married to my own work.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I can totally agree with that now. I see what you're saying. So if I get to the end of a thing where I'm like, there won't be time to come back and revisit this, and I got to get a great sounding balance now, I'll do that. Or if, like you said, I know that the people who are taking it home need to get excited about this, I'll do it. But when it's my own stuff, I'm just like, I don't want to do that. I know I'll be coming back and continuing to work on this. So what's the point of me, trying to build up a rough right now?
Correct. And that's, I mean, that's my style, but that's how I've kind of, made that system. But yeah, if I'm engineering for someone else, I'm going to try to make them the best rough mix at the end of the session I possibly can, hopefully to get to impress them and get more work. Likewise, because I primarily mix here, if someone sends me a project, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a side note on mixing, but I always have them send me a rough mix of some sort. Either they've mixed it already and they weren't happy, or they have a rough mix, because I know whatever it is they've been listening to, they've listened to it 1,000 times. And so even as I'm starting over and mixing, I'm going to be sure that I'm aware. I just ran into that the other day, actually, but I always run into that. I'm going to be aware of what they were listening to over and over again, because it's going to be difficult for them to break away from that also.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart. I mean, it's like the meet it and beat it philosophy too for mixing on a project that somebody else already concluded, or has already finished production on, and they send over rough mixes. I've always felt like it was a nice cheat. If I can hear the rough mix, load it in, and just beat that, then at least, even if I'm feeling self-critical about my own mix, I can go back to the other one and go, okay, I'm beating that, so I'm in good shape,
Well, yeah, that's part of it. And then the other is that sometimes, even if their balances are just a little bit different than I would, feel it, I have to, take some care in like if they've got, a song that's really key, say guitar heavy, and really the piano keyboards are, I think are probably more important than what they have, in their current mix or whatever. I have to really think through, how am I going to invert this without it just being totally foreign to them, So
Right.
I have to kind of ease them into that generally and say, okay, my gut feeling is that, one thing we might want to do is make the piano and the, any other keyboards jump out of this a little bit more. And, what do you think? And then I know they have to get used to hearing it that way. So it's a step-by-step process always,
I forgot from your backstory, but are you a keyboard player first?
No, actually, I'm a guitar player.
Okay.
Guitars, yeah.
So you're just sick of hearing guitar.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. Yeah, but no, I'm just just using that as just a pulled out of the sky concept.
Yeah.
Sometimes people send you a rough mix that you think, well, gee, I don't really think their balances are all that right for how I think this song should go, but I know they've listened to it so much they probably got used to hearing it that way. So
Yeah. I know I feel that way about my own stuff too, and it's very tricky to find that balance between something was right in the rough mix while I was working on a project, and I've just got demo-itis.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pivot, if you don't mind, to a story. I want to come back to your studio, talk about all that, and we'll have lots to say. But before we get there, if you don't mind, I don't think we talked about it on your last episode, because I think I heard you share this story at another event later, and I was really struck by it. You, of course, have been in this record-making business for a long time. You've had a lot of experiences. And one of your experiences goes back to a Fleetwood Mac session and some particular engineering shenaniganry that, well, maybe not a shenanigan, but like some fanciness that helped save a session once. Do you know what I'm referring to? And do you think you might be able to share that story?
Yeah, that would be Fleetwood Mac's Rumours album.
That one, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been others of different things. Well, one of the things that's always been fascinating, about what we get to do, and it's to me it's all art, it's all creativity. I don't really ever even approach records with knowing exactly what I'm going to do. Mixing, producing, engineering. It's just whatever seems to fit the environment. And when back in the days when I guess most everybody that kind of goes back this far, recording studios had staffs, staff engineers, and our artists, producers, record companies, and projects would come in, and a lot of times you just get assigned to do things. And one of the things that's always been amazing to me, which is just kind of a side of how this Fleetwood Mac thing came together, is you never really know what's going to be a big success or what isn't. I mean, you kind of make have your own opinions about what you think is a great record or which isn't, but whether one thing you're working on is going to be a success is really an unknown at that time. You're just doing your job. So I of course, was a big fan of Fleetwood Mac, and going way back to earlier incarnations, and I was a big fan of what Keith Olsen did with the Fleetwood Mac album with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and they had some big hits. Well, when they were working on the Rumours record, and there was a lot of stories about all that. They had started it up in at the record plant in Sausalito, California, and they worked on that record a very long time. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of things that went into that. Probably even the pressure of coming off of big hits like Rhiannon and Landslide and all this stuff. And so they worked on this record. In fact, according to Ken Colley, because he did write a book about it, Making Rumours, which is really a great read. And they worked on that record. It took a year. It was a year in the making. And at the time, this was 1975, 76. If you put what cost of homes and cars and everything were, this was like over $1 million production. Okay. Wow. So it was 1 year and $1 million to make that record. Now it more than paid all that back with the huge success it had, but along the way, pretty far into it, I mean, almost to the point where they thought they were ready to finally mix, they realized that the tapes were shedding. I mean, there was so many hours on the tape heads that I think it was maybe two things. The tape itself, I think it might have been whatever series of Ampex tape that was at the time, but between the tape was starting to shed some, and then they put so many hours in overdubs and everything, it was really just the tracks were just falling apart. Okay, so Ken Colley and Richard Dashit were the producers. They really thought that they were losing this album. Okay, and someone had suggested, I think from Wally Hyder's studios at the time, that I was at ABC. I was working for ABC Records, ABC Studios, and we really had the state of the art in that period of time, 75, 76, and all that. I mean, we had these really large custom API Frank DiMedio custom consoles. We had, it was before the days of lockup, but we had lots of 3M 79 tape, 24-track tape machines. And so we had large consoles and lots of tape machines. And so whoever contacted the chief engineer at ABC at the time, Jerry Faree is his name, they said, we've got master tapes and we've got safety tapes. The master tapes, are just worn out. I mean, we're losing, all the fidelity on everything. Someone said, you might be able to help us out. So Jerry came up with a solution of taking their master tape and their safety that it, was still, had only just been, the main tracks recorded, the basics, drums, bass, right, and probably some keyboards. And us would be, before lockups and everything, us being able to go through and move the overdubs, the newer overdubs, onto the original tapes that still had high fidelity drums and, bass and just the basic tracks. And the way we had to do that is, and there was three of us that basically implemented it, but Jerry was the one that really came up with the solution. is we had a master tape on one machine, a 3M79 24 track. We had a safety tape on the other, and we patched the overdubs that we needed to try to save onto the master, because on the overdub reels they were using, all the original stuff just sounded awful. I mean, it just lost all its fidelity. The
band that tracked initially.
Yeah, the basic track stuff, which just sounded awful. The new stuff was still was starting to show some wear, but the new stuff was really okay, but the old stuff was just worn out. They'd put so many hours on those tapes, and you're just not even thinking that would come to that. So the only way we could really put these tracks together was to have everything coming up on the console and patching the hi-hat channel from one tape and one machine, and the hi-hat channel from the other machine, the master and the safety. And we put on headphones, and we had those just in our ear, one machine on one side and one on the other, and we would make grease pencil marks on the tape and get everything just lined up, and then hit play on one machine and record simultaneously, and while the hi-hats were in phase, and we could vary speed it just slightly too. We got away with a little bit of vary speed too. As long as we could keep those locked up, we knew we were pretty much in sync. And then we'd have to stop when it's skewed, scrub back, a bar or two, and then do the same thing all the way through every song on the record.
Wow, and that's amazing, man. So just to make sure that we're understanding this, there wasn't any automatic sync going on between these tape machines at that point, right?
No.
So you were having to press play on two of them, and then hope that they would stay in sync as you went. And if they were, then a hi-hat from one tape pan to one ear in your headphones, and a hi-hat from the other tape pan to the other ear in your headphones. If they were locked up, or not really locked, but if they were just playing in sync together and hadn't drifted, you would hear that hi-hat sound like it was coming in the middle on your headphones?
Yeah, correct. I mean, and so if it started to, flange or phase a little bit, then we knew we were getting out of sync,
Wow. If you're ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound great no matter what your studio situation, then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get great sounding mixes in your studio using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR right now at checkout for 10% off any course for a limited time. What about clocks? Did you have to was there, I know that my old MCI tape machine had like a crystal clock that would go with the speed feedback loop and stuff. Was that part of this system to try and keep the tape machines running at the same speed together that way, or am I making it too complicated?
Well, I mean, this was 1975, I think, 75 or 76. I don't remember. It wasn't until 78 that I remember there was any kind of even, early stages of being able to actually sync, tape machines. And even that was pretty crude way back then. But at this point, that didn't exist. What did exist is that the 3M tape machines had a synchro lock, individually. So they were pretty good at staying on speed. Now, Ampex tape machines at the time, were their consistency of speed was very dependent on the reel tension and everything. So that would have added probably another degree of error potential. So at the time, and that's why they ended up coming to ABC, and Jerry, figured that this could work, is the 3M machines on their own ran, at 30 IPS, they stayed pretty steady. So when we were locking two together, even though we weren't locking them together, but when we would push record on one and play on the other right at the same time, as close as we could do it, we'd I don't even remember how long we could play before we had to stop. It wasn't very long. I mean, we would stop and start through the whole record,
Wow.
to do this,
Now, the other thing I can think of is in those high stress situations like that too, boy, is it critical that you don't get thrown out of balance and flustered and everything like that, where you start running the risk that you, instead of hitting play and record, you hit record and play, or, you don't want to, it's like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Where do you put the remotes for these so they don't accidentally record on the wrong machine as you're going,
Well, it's a lot of pressure. I mean, it really is. I mean, even when I did a lot of the, string dates and everything, I mean, we were always under a lot of pressure because you had to very quickly, find tracks and everything, and it was no undos. And if you, arm the wrong track, you could erase somebody's, critical. I mean, it was a lot of pressure.
Happened, man. I've never done that ever. No.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Just kidding.
Good. but yeah, it is a lot of pressure. And what was a little different about that experience? I remember it, so well is, so I think, Ken Clay and Richard Dashett were there. Mick Fleetwood was there. Lindsay was there.
No pressure.
Yeah, the girls weren't there. I don't think Christine and Stevie were there, but Richard and this was a big deal for Richard and Ken too. I mean, the opportunity, they really went from engineering and ended up being the producers of this project, and so they were under a great deal of pressure, and so it was kind of all eyes on us. Like, is this really going to work? I mean, they really thought that the record was ruined. Okay.
Wow.
Now, for me and a guy named Bob Diavla, who was, it was Jerry Faree and Bob Diavla were two of the members of the tech staff, and I was in the engineering staff. And for us, it was just the challenge. I mean, all I remember about it is Jerry saying, "Oh yeah, we can do this, and this is how you need to do it," because we were kind of taking turns because it would just burn you out, and so I'd sit there and he'd say, just as long as the hi-hats are right, you're on, just stop, scrub back. And so, however many hours it took to do this, I don't recall, it was a lot, but the three of us kind of took turns doing it.
And then not only that, but when you have to scrub back, press play, you're hearing those hi-hats in sync, and then you drop into record again on that new, I guess, what did you call this? The mix slave reel?
Well, it was the original master. The original
master. Oh, you were punching
tape.
Back in. You were bringing the overdubs back into the original master.
You're right.
Wow. That's why the rhythm section sounds so good on those records.
Oh yeah, it's fresh. Yeah, it's fresh.
It's
but
fresh.
Now here's another thing that was actually very unique about this, because this didn't happen very often. Recording was very expensive in those days. I mean, tape alone. I mean, I worked on a record, a film. What was it? The Children of Sanchez with Chuck Mangione, and I remember we used 87 reels of 2-inch tape on that record. 87.
That's a lot of trumpet solos, man.
Yeah, but I mean that's a lot of money in tape, right? So one thing that was actually very unique about the way Ken and Richard started this project up in Sausalito is they weren't locked up, but they actually ran 2 tape machines simultaneously. So when they got their master reels, where they picked master basic tracks, their what you'd call their safety was actually first generation. It wasn't like what we normally would do is we would record, and when we had master takes and everything, then we would make an analog safety, which would be a generation down. So it wouldn't be quite as perfect as the original, but it was there as an insurance policy that if, God forbid, something went wrong with the master, you could use the safety and it would be, close. But this was unique in that the master tapes that we were adding those overdubs back to had not been, I mean, they were first generation. They weren't a copy of something.
Well, so some of the stuff that, might be worth painting a picture of is, in terms of context, is the many things that were scary about that. I mean, with tape machines, there, you quickly learn, I mean, I don't know how quickly, but you certainly learn to press play. At least I did. And then you look right at the machine and you train yourself. You're ready for disaster all the time. And it's scary.
Yeah. If the wrong track is in record, I mean, God forbid. I mean, you're gonna hit stop like
so
in a
fast.
nanosecond, right? Yeah. No, you're constantly doing that.
And sometimes the tape machines, I mean, these are powerful appliances. It's like if something goes a little bit funny with the mechanics of the tape going across the heads, you can destroy a master tape so fast, or a break could happen and a reel could start stretching the tape and turning it into taffy or something like that.
I've had it happen. I mean, thank goodness. I mean, all I can say is to this point, every time that's ever happened, I've always had a safety. And there's even been times when the tape is the machine's gone wild and stretched or something, and then it ended up only stretching like before the song actually started or something, or after the song was over. I mean, I've been very fortunate every time. Or in the worst case, there's been times we've had to actually go to a safety reel, but they were current. So I was always big on making safeties.
Yeah, who's gonna produce that video series called Tape Machines Gone Wild?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of things that I took from all those experiences, though, even like the Fleetwood Mac thing, which for me it was just that challenge about, wow, can we really do this? And then when it all was working, of course they were rejoicing. I mean, they got to finish the mixing the record or mix the record, and it was a huge success. But to this day, even my way of working with in the digital domain and having these DAWs like Pro Tools and everything, I'm still a feel guy about music. I don't really worry too much about zooming in and quantizing and making things perfect, because I know what we got away with that wasn't perfect, but it still just felt right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about that Fleetwood Mac album, I mean, all those overdubs and everything, they're just everything that we transferred over. It's kind of give or take. I don't know how many milliseconds. I mean, not enough milliseconds to actually perceive a flam, but they certainly weren't. If you zoomed them out in Pro Tools, I doubt they would look like they were, all quantized.
Right. So, rock stars, what's our takeaway? No need to quantize your record and get it perfect. Just spend a year recording it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but there is something to be said about just realizing that it just really has to feel right.
Yeah. Okay, cool, man. Great stuff. Thank you for sharing that story. It's so much fun to just kind of take the Wayback Machine like that and okay, I'm sorry, not too far back, but just hearing the stories of the records being made. And I feel really fortunate that I got to make records through tape going into the world of Pro Tools. Now we're in a very exciting time anyway. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is like the things that are available to us now, working in the computer with the plugins and all the stuff that's possible. I find it really, really exciting. But there are some things from the way we used to do it that we still need to carry forward into the way we do it now. And I feel like one of those is the tactile quality of recording and mixing and staying in the flow and in the moment, and not having to, turn on your science brain too often during a session. So what do I mean by that? I know that you've been exploring some controller surfaces and things that help you interact with mixing. And so let's pivot and tell us a little bit about your studio. Like, what are you surrounded by right now for your workspace?
Okay. Well, first thing, this is a Carl Tatz design room. So I have the Phantom Focus monitoring. I'm using Dyna Audio M1s. I've had for a number of years. Let's see, I'm going through Carl Tatz processing for EQing the room. My hardware really is I'm using Lynx Aurora 16 converters. I have a solid state logic control surface, the UF8, and love that. a couple of preamps because 95% of the time easily I only mix in my room. So I have a couple of API preamps that I use. That's what I'm using right now.
Mm-hmm.
A Tube Tech compressor gives me some versatility if I'm doing an occasional overdub, which is usually just something that comes up if I'm mixing and we need to add a tambourine or a background part or something. Mm-hmm. And I've still got some pieces of hardware of effects units by Roland, old stuff that I've had for a very long time. They're 330 series of reverb and delay. Got a couple Yamaha reverbs, the Rev 5 and and I was the SPX 990 in here. And it's funny, I still find that if I use those, even though I've got a lot of great plug-in reverbs and everything, that they just add a little different texture to something. It's just, I don't even know how to explain it. They're different than what I have with my plugins. But that's basically my setup. My speakers are we've got two 12-inch self-powered NHT subwoofers that are part of the room design, and then I've got a Bryston 4B for the M1s, and so it's a stereo mix room. That's really the whole setup. I've got a lot of plugins. I'm running a Mac Mini computer. I'd say that at least, in my opinion, 80% of this is the room acoustics themselves for me mixing.
Yeah.
If not more than that. I mean, it's like the gear to me is just something that you use. It's like a really great guitar player picks up kind of any guitar and they sound great, and then it gets into nuances between the guitars, and so I kind of feel like the gear is, it helps you, can help your workflow and all that. But what I love the most is that the room is very accurate, and what I hear come out of those monitors, I can pinpoint where things are. The imaging is terrific, and so to me, that's kind of what makes all this work in a home environment, is having this setup.
Right on. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you on Instagram about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version are they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or a computer back in the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more mixed-up mix messages from the band. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music, and it all works in your browser with no downloads required. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Samply.app and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Have you ever wished you could remove the click track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks, with a set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then iZotope RX is your magic wand. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars, or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, the second half of the show. My guest today is Bob Bullock, joining us from his studio. Bob, are you ready to jam?
I am.
All right, dude. So let's keep talking about some of your studio. You left off just talking about your Phantom Focus Mixroom. Maybe tell us what that is. I mean, what when you look around, what is a Phantom Focus Mixroom? What do you want to say about what it sounds like and why you were glad that you did it, kind of thing?
Well, I mean, what it is Carl Tatz has done a fantastic job of really, zoning in on accurate monitoring. His Phantom Focus system, it's tuned accuracy and control. Okay, so like going way back for me, and this, of course, these are all my opinions. This is the way I view things and what I do. But I mean, going back for me is recording studios. A lot of times weren't really the most ideal places for mixing. Okay, because they had to serve so many purposes. I mean, there's lots of great studio designers. There's been certainly lots of temples of sound, great studios built, and some really fantastic control rooms, of course. But the control rooms, have to be able to take a lot of, the speakers have to take a lot of sound pressure. There's, it's a pretty abusive situation and everything. So when you go into mix, even back in the days when I, was assisting Roger Nichols on Steely Dan records, I mean, those guys would, when cool. They went to mix, they would transform the control room into a more high fidelity mixing environment.
What sort of stuff would they do to make that happen?
They'd bring in custom amplifiers and speakers and custom headphones. I mean, like at the time, when I started at ABC, the first sessions that I got to kind of participate in as an assistant with Roger was the Katie Lied record for Steely Dan, and they had in front of the big, huge monitors that were in Studio C at ABC, they brought in, I think it was Magnaplanar speakers, and I forgot what brand amps at the time they were using, but all this like real, hi-fi type of stuff, and that's what they felt was, was crucial for mixing was, not just, the real giant, woofers and horns and everything, speaker systems, but something that was more like would be in a home, in
a yacht. I mean, how you going to mix yacht rock if you don't have a yacht there, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's got to be, so to them it had to be like bookshelf speakers and things that would be more realistic to someone that would have a nice playback system, in their home or theater or whatever, So that always stuck with me. I mean, it was kind of like, we record these records in a studio and we mix, and a lot of times we have the big giant speakers, or maybe we just have some, we try to maybe bring in our own near fields, our own amplifiers to try to have some concept of what it would be like for the end user, but to me, the concept of a room that's designed solely for mixing just has always made so much more sense. And my system, I mean, if I were cutting tracks in here and everything, I don't think my speakers would last very long if we were, everybody's getting out of their headphones and from cutting a track with live drums and everything, would probably blow everything up. But once I've got everything recorded and I come, into my system for mixing, it's very accurate. It's very quiet in here. What comes out of the speakers is, just as far as imaging of left and right, all the frequencies that would normally just be out of control, are all smoothed out. And So it's just a very neutral environment. And I believe you have kind of the same system now.
I do. And in defense of our rooms, I would actually say that, because I was worried about that too. I thought to Carl, I was like, what are we going to do about the intern who does feedback in the control room and, blows up the system? And obviously the answer is that hopefully is don't have the intern do feedback and blow up the system. But stuff happens, and Carl's answer to that partly was that you'd have to work pretty hard to blow this thing up because of the way it crosses over as part of the setup. You're not driving like the smaller cone with full frequency where the low is going to destroy it. So I thought that was very helpful. And I have done some overdubs and I've been cutting some bass and stuff like that in there, and it sounds awesome. So I'm happy to say that.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, like I said, when I'm saying that, I don't mean to think even that my system's so sensitive that someone could turn the speakers up a little too loud and blow them up. I just meant that it's a more finely tuned, accurate environment, that's kind of geared for mixing and not necessarily for someone to, crank up, kick drum, to 120 decibels or anything. It's not designed for that. It's designed, specifically for mixing. But yeah, that's a good point. It's a pretty stout system. It's very, pretty hardy for sure. But that was what led me. This is actually the third room that Carl has built for me, because I've moved a couple times. But way back when he did my first studio, it actually started off. The intent was for me to have a really accurate place to play back what I was working on at other studios at home. So really what I was looking for was a very accurate. I took the dining room in my home and made it a playback.
More like a listening room.
A listening room, yeah. Right. And from there, I started realizing that, gee, I could bring some gear in here and I could do some editing, and then later realized I could do some mixing. And then when we moved to the second studio, we stepped up the whole thing, and that's when I really realized that I could definitely do this in a home studio environment, at least as well as I could do anywhere else.
Wow. Yeah, Rockstars, just for some context, you may or may not have heard of me refer to the evolution of the home studio over, 30 years. And we're hearing it in real time right now.
Well, and so, for me, like the recording process is still very much the same for me as it's always been. With the addition of using, Pro Tools, for example, a digital workstation for recording, but I still do all my recording in commercial recording studios with I favor, having a large desk, an SSL, a Neve, an API. I still prefer to record tracks and overdubs in that kind of an environment. But I do really love the freedom that I have to mix in my own home recording studio, and that's really probably the primary reason for me to have jumped so much into in the box mixing and all is the flexibilities of being able to come back to things at a later time, or work on a couple of projects simultaneously and work on different songs, so I don't really get burnt out on any one thing. And so my mixing process is completely different than it was 20 years ago, but my recording process really hasn't changed at all.
Right on. Well, so, I have had enough experiences like that where I know how exciting it is to come back from some other studio you've been at and pull up the tracks for the first time in a new environment where you're going to start mixing it or continue overdubs. And it's a pretty cool thing, and it reminds me that is a different experience or a different feeling than when you're always in the same space that you both record it and mix it. And you've always heard it sounding like that coming out of these speakers, so it is nice to have that change up like that.
Mm-hmm. I think it is. One thing you touched on earlier, and I completely agree, probably luckily for us, even as a young engineer first starting out, going from playing guitar in bands, and I just really wanted to learn how to control the sound. So, that was my first thoughts of getting to this in the first place, is I wanted to feel that I could make something sound the way I wanted it to sound, whether it was drums, guitars, bass, piano, vocals, that I'd feel in control of that. And what I've learned in all these decades is that I'm not in control of it. Well, maybe to some extent. But what I mean is that's been the quest, was to be able to, say I want to make have the guitar sound like this, and so that's why I want to learn the ins and outs of all this gear and everything. But I think that just being excited about technology changing and always being excited about that is really important. If I got bored with the technology, or I didn't want to keep moving with the technology, then I'd probably have to quit. Because I'm glad that I have the experiences I have with like analog and large format desk and vintage gear. But I'm really, like you said, I'm just as excited about working with plugins, and I love my little SSL control surface. It does everything I need.
About that.
Yeah, it does everything I need, and and of course, I spent thousands of hours, recording and mixing on SSL desk, and still record on them some. But it's been great for me to still be working on an SSL, but now I'm using it, just as a control surface in my mix room.
And that's the UF8 is what you have?
Yes. Yeah.
And so describe what it is for the Rockstars.
Well, it can be expanded, and I may get around to that, but the basic model is a 8-channel control surface. Okay. And so it's got 8 faders that actually do feel like it's a real desk. It's SSL quality. But inside it, and in a pretty small space, I've got all the usual solos, cuts, and I can page to different banks. So if I had 60 channels, I can just keep banking through banks of 8 and all that. I can also go in and I can manipulate my plug-in EQs and compressors. And it's also set up, which is kind of cool for me. I can have different layers, up to 3. And so because I go between Nuendo and Pro Tools, I can just push a button. So, if I open up Pro Tools, it's layer 2 for me, and it's universal, controls all of my Pro Tools functions. Layer 1 is my Nuendo system.
So would you have Pro Tools and Nuendo open at the same time on the computer, and you just press a button on the UF8 and it flips from one app to the other?
I have before. I have actually done that if I wanted just to, review something or extract something or, whatever I have, or just maybe somebody had a Pro Tools session.
Yeah.
And I'm mixing in Nuendo, but I'll have their Pro Tools session open and I'll just go and check it out real quick, or, see what it was I want to copy over. Maybe a plug-in they used,
Now, let me ask some of the tough questions on this. So in my experience, I've always been really intrigued by controllers and things, but sometimes the challenge is you try something and it sort of feels promising here and here, but then something about it doesn't work without extra button clicks or something, and it kind of breaks my flow a little bit. Maybe tell us some of the ways that you're using this, where, like, what aspects of it do you just not even have to think about, and you just go right for the move and there it is? And what are the places where, it's easier to go back to the mouse and kind of do this on the screen and then come back to the controller?
Well, I'd have to say because I've been working, this way for a long time, that over the years, I've found that I'm probably quicker doing most things with a keyboard and mouse. Okay. So it's not my main reason. That's why I like this piece. For example, my main reason for having a control surface is to have the fader functions. Everything else is really just here and there. I might flip it to effects and manipulate an EQ. But generally speaking, I probably still do most of that just with a keyboard and mouse. The only thing that's ever been awkward to me about mixing in the box is not having the ability to just have all these faders in front of me and just grab things, okay? And I've gotten used to a lot of it, of working that way, but even just having some faders, because it's kind of my process of mixing is actually after I have everything, where I always say I feel like it's the song is kind of mixing itself. I've got everything where I want it. Then the last thing is for me to give it a pulse. And that's where I start, doing automation of, which is kind of like playing the console like a keyboard, and that's what gives it the depth and dimension. And so that's what I really use even my little control surface for. Before this, I had an artist mix that worked really well for me, but I wore it out. Display went out. I mean, I had it for many years, and it was a workhorse, but it finally just had enough things wrong with it where I needed to replace it. So it was good timing for me to see that just when I was going to do that, SSL, branched into this aspect of things. But yeah, Lidge, it's really just having the faders that are probably the most crucial part for me.
Okay. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini, and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries at my studio, and it works great. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 into a single 500 module. Now you can get the same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's BBDI and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. I got really excited when I saw that SSL was making these controllers, and I went ahead and got a UC1, which is the channel strip, controller, and it gives you the EQ and the compression and stuff like that. And I've been having a lot of fun using that. And then I do have the Avid S1, and in fact, I just got another one from my buddy Kevin Ward, the mix coach. If you guys know him, Rockstars, he's been a guest on the show as well. And so I'm going to start doing like 16 faders. And I'm still in that exploration phase. I haven't been using a system yet for years because it's kind of a new mix system for me. But I'm excited about it. And it's interesting to hear you talk about, the power of the fader. That is the one thing that, you can't really substitute with the mouse very well. And two places I find the faders really useful to me, because I agree with you, just grabbing faders and going is the power of mixing. one arm move and one button push to accomplish something instead of multiple, or instead of having to like awkwardly mouse to a certain part of the screen. But at the beginning of a mix, I love the, strip the faders down, rebuild it really quickly, doing comparisons, extreme level comparisons, and then also being able to flip polarity on stuff really quickly, I find really helpful because it helps me more quickly discover where the balances of things might be. And then again, at the end, like you said, where it's time to just start, I love how you said it, putting the pulse in the mix. It's like, don't think about, if you're adjusting something because you're not hearing it, you need to write a vocal or something, like, God, let's not think about how the numbers, at that point. Let's grab a fader and just push it until it sounds right to you in your ears and do it that way. There's something cool about what the result is when you're doing it without thinking about automation lines and how many dB and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, that certainly, is in line with how I approach all this stuff. I mean, it's in the early days of mastering, mixing. For me, we had consoles without automation, and generally the way we would mix is several people would have moves to do.
Yeah, that was fun times.
And then we'd make pencil marks of the fader. So at the end of the song, if song came up that we wanted a really abrupt ending, but I'd literally, I learned this from somebody. It wasn't my original idea, but you literally get yardsticks, and at the very end, last, note of the song, just get a yardstick and pull all the faders back quickly, so just the reverb would hang over, things like that. And while you're running through a mix, someone might be on the other side of the console getting ready to push, the reverb on in the background vocals in the bridge, or, I might be, writing a vocal and someone else is writing the piano, or, things like that. So it was always a lot of hands-on effort. And then especially with SSL, I really loved their automation. It really was an assistant where you could be doing these things. And then now you had kind of like a player piano here that it could be doing what the past you did. It would recreate that, and then you could overdub on top of that with moves. And so the one thing that I do miss about mixing the way that I do now is, as an engineer and a mixer, it's kind of interesting to me how you get so comfortable with looking at a big desk that might have 72 channels. And you're, without even thinking about it, you just kind of glance across, and you know where everything is. You see where all your faders are. You just kind of do a quick scan, and you kind of focus on where all your pans are, what your EQ curves look like on everything. And I really do miss that. I like that. So one of the things I like about mixing with Nuendo is the mixer that is on my large screen looks like a desk. It's got, all my EQs and everything, they're built into the mix template, the way it opens up. And so I can kind of simultaneously look at all that stuff. And then when I can grab faders, I don't really just ride one fader. Generally the way I mix is, if I'm writing vocals, I may have, the other one hand may be writing the lead vocal. My other hand, I may be doing simultaneous moves with instruments or the background vocals or whatever. So it's a lot more complex in a simple sort of way than just having my mouse and trying to do one channel at a time, for example.
Plus, for example, doing automation passes on something, if you can ride 2 or 3 instruments at once, at least to get ballpark, that's a time saver, because otherwise it takes longer to ride through a song all the way from start to end in real time, one instrument at a time. Plus, then you go ride the other instrument and the first one doesn't feel right or something. It's nice when they can all work in conjunction. We've been watching, my girlfriend and I have been watching Downton Abbey recently.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the seasons, the cook begins to get cataracts and she loses her eyesight. And she's like struggling. She survives for a long time in the kitchen because she just reaches and she knows where everything is. And
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking that analogy as we're talking about reaching for pans. I'm like, yeah, it's been happening for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's muscle memory. You just know, where something is, where the reach is, and you do it, but a lot of all that stuff, has helped me, adapt to all the latest in technology so that I feel like I'm hopefully not overusing it. That's the one thing I've always tried to be mindful of is, not overdoing, the, quantizing and tuning and over processing. And, so I try to really still mix today kind of in a real basic way. I always like, group things together, and I'll get like all the guitars and see how they sound. And then I'll just put sections together at a time and then see how they blend. And, but I still find that I mix in a very simple way, probably just because it's a carryover of, doing things the way we did, for me, going back all the way to the early 70s,
Yeah. Well, you got to watch out. If you get too hot on technology, next thing you know, everybody knows that you can come in and fix all their master and slave reels on their records by lining up the hi-hats for days.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, those are fun challenges, doing all that stuff.
Yeah, you just don't want to do it every session.
Right. Yeah.
Tell us about some of the new projects you've been working on. What's some stuff that you're excited about coming out of your studio recently?
Well, I was a co-producer, really, but producer of a project called the High Mountain Breezes last year, and it's really made up of studio musicians and studio singers, demo singers, whatever, that we put together a few cover songs and then some original songs that were within our little unit, which we're calling the High Mountain Breezes players. And there's a website for that. And we've been getting we've been getting a lot of streaming of this project. I mean, it's really been kind of amazing to me. We recut some classic. It's country based, but we cut some classic things like Amarillo by Morning, made famous by George Strait, of course, and then Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, Will the Circle Be Unbroken. We did different versions of all these songs. They were just fun songs to revisit. Nice. Bridge Over Troubled Waters. So all those are real familiar songs, but we tried to just do our own thing with them, and we recorded it all at the Sound Kitchen here in Brentwood. And
cool! We were just talking with Daniel Ford. Dr. Ford is right there in Studio C.
Yeah. So we were in Studio 19. Actually, we cut everything there, recorded it all there, recorded it all through the Neve desk, and then and on Pro Tools. And then I brought it here to my studio. Really just imported the WAV files into my Nuendo system, and I mixed it here. And so that that was really exciting. But that was kind of an example of what I was saying earlier of recorded everything in Pro Tools and then just started from nil, on mixing, which was made it fresh for me and fun,
Right on.
And
do you you were talking about Cubase being great because you can see the mixer in front of you, and then I was just reminded that the SSL plugins, which maybe you're not using the channel strip, but they have this 360 app where like you see an SSL console in front of you while you're using the UC1 and everything. Is that something you've messed with?
I've messed with it a little bit, and I think all that's great. I mean, I like channel strips, and I like, and certainly even with Pro Tools or any other DAW. I mean, you can create a template that is a SSL desk if you want, or a Neve desk if you want. I mean, so So we certainly can do all that. I think I was just pointing out that in Nuendo in particular, I just always liked the way the stock session opens up. Just the way it looks, and with panning and everything. Just you can build all those with anything, and I get that. So I'm not really opposed to Pro Tools at all, but Nuendo was just always a little more of a kind of early days. It looked more familiar to me, like an analog disc. And and I do use channel strips even with my Nuendo system. I've got a lot of plugins, and I use SSL channel strips, or I've got a lot of Neve stuff, and I do enjoy the fact that I can create a template that's like a Trident based template, or a API based template, or a Neve, or or SSL. But that was just a little side note. That's one of the things I've always enjoyed about Nuendo in particular.
When do you find it useful to do things like that, like build a Trident or a Neve? Is that sort of like a preemptive thing, and then you think, on this project, I'm going to try doing more of a Neve mixer for it? Or is it something where you allow yourself exploration at the beginning of a process, and you're on the kick drum and you're like, does this sound good through the Neve? Does this sound good through the SSL? Like how do you balance the endless, the vortex of endless options against making some good, smart, right choices and being able to move quickly while you're mixing?
Well, for me, I've always just wanted to make it fun, So one of the things that has made the process of making records, what's been so exciting to me, is even going back in the days when, we really only worked in conventional studios, is I'd work with people and we'd decide to go cut an album at a studio that had an API desk, for example, for that project. Or maybe another time we go, there's a studio that's it's a Trident desk and different sound. Let's go there. It's going to make everything we do unique to that environment, And then we'd get into things with like, well, what if we, record this on a, I remember like going back, I know you'd done a thing with Bob Clearmountain, and I know going back, maybe in the 80s or something, I think it was working at the power station doing a Broadway show. I don't know what year it was now, but it was Big River whenever we did that cast album for the Big River Broadway show. But we recorded most of it at the power station, and they had this newly built Neve 8068, in there that was, really all the studios that had 8068 series Neves, they were old. I mean, it was kind of like it was like someone maybe in the 70s building a brand new, 57 Chevy just from original parts.
Wow.
So instead of it being a 57 Chevy that was, 25 years old or whatever, it was a brand new one, And so they had this Neve 8068 and I think that was studio, I don't remember if it was studio A or B, but it was just really fun to be working on something that was even then kind of vintage, but it was a brand spanking new one.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the decision making for when I worked with people, would work with different, artists and things, was we'd go to studio because it was different, because it would kind of take us into a different place because of the tools that were provided. So I never really worried too much about bringing my own microphones or bringing, my own gear. I kind of wanted to just, work with what was there, and that would take me to a different place. So even now when I mix, I will do that. I will just like start throwing on just like all API stuff on my DAW to mix from. And then another project, I'll kind of start maybe on the drums with like SSL channel strips, and before you know it, it looks like I've created an SSL G series disc,
Right.
and it's really, for me, it's just for fun. It's just like, to keep it creative and not try to duplicate, what I did last time or anything ever. Just, I'm in the same room, but maybe I can make the room different.
Do you want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Do you want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro-sounding mix that won't take years to learn, the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of creating a great sounding mix, then register for my free course Mixmaster Bundle to get great mixes using simple free plugins. And get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR at checkout to get 10% off any course for a limited time. Well, I like that. And my takeaway would be, choose a console, for example, and do this mix this time around, like you say, on an API console, or mimic a Trident or an SSL, as opposed to thinking I need to explore what each one sounds like on each instrument of this mix. Because I've done that. Actually, I've shared the story on this podcast. The first time a band I was producing, The Living Things, we went into Blackbird Studios many years ago, and we got there and we were like, wait, we can try anything we want. So we were pulling up the mix. We were in there for like 4 days, and we brought in every single piece of gear. I think Vance has finally, hopefully Vance, you've forgiven me this many years later, but we brought in every single piece of gear for every instrument and listened to them all. And we were like, V76, let's put that on the kick drum and see what that sounds like, Man, and needless to say, we got to the end and we did not have a good sounding mix. We just had a mess, Yeah,
it's hard to stay focused, doing that. I get it. Now, I've done all that, but the way I, done all that is I've been doing this for 45 years now, I guess. So, I spent a lot of time in studios, both in Los Angeles, different parts of Los Angeles, and then, moving to Nashville. But especially in my first 10 or 11 years in Los Angeles, where, I'd bring bands in and, then we would experiment. I mean, the whole point of doing all that stuff was really just to learn the craft. And to me, learning the craft was just building experiences of, like, when I use a V76, how different is that from, an API 312 or whatever, and just kind of storing that information to pull from later, and just trying things. And then, now, I mean, again, I can't really justify the time it would take to do a lot of that. So I just kind of have it in my head that I think in this particular song or this particular project, that this particular series of tools would probably be, the right call for that. And I try not to really look any further, because I simply don't have time to do that.
Yeah, that's a good tip, though. All right, well, let me pivot to another part of mixing that's really important, especially if you want to do this for a long time. How loud do you like to listen while you're mixing, and when is a good time to turn up the speakers?
If I probably like most people, if I'm working too long without a break, I tend to start turning things louder. I mean, and I slap my hand. I mean, when I was younger, I wasn't quite as smart about all that, but now I know that if I'm starting to push it up, I still have a SPL meter, that sits here, and I kind of see what's going on. So if I'm mixing and I'm kind of like in that neighborhood of 90, 92 or something, I go, okay, I'm probably going to get some longevity out of the day. But if I start just getting fatigued where I don't feel like I'm, feeling it, and I start cranking it up, I realize it's time for me to stop,
Yeah.
So probably, maybe in a low to moderate. Now, I definitely have always done different levels at different times of the day. That's just been kind of maybe a way to keep it interesting too. Like I do like to come in fresh and listen to something maybe I was working on last night really softly, because I feel like my ears are I'm really fresh to the whole thing, and if I listen really softly, I can get a feel for is there enough bass coming through here? Are the vocals too loud or or too soft? And so I guess throughout like a day of mixing, not only do I take more breaks, now because I'm working in my own environment, no one's coming in after me, but throughout the day, it's probably low, medium, loud at different times. So that's really about, I mean, I just try to make sure I don't burn my ears out.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. And I love doing that first listen in the morning, except for the fact that I usually think that the mix from the night before didn't quite get it right.
Well, yeah, that's the luxury of being able to work at home, because if I feel like I'm out of the zone, I can stop,
Yeah.
So I think my clients benefit because what I call billable hours are usually very efficient hours, because if I work 2 hours and I go, I'm for some reason, I'm just not connected to this today. I don't usually have deadlines that require that I have to finish it today.
Mm-hmm.
I can say I'll come back in the morning, and so I do that. But yeah, I just, I try not to, to not damage my hearing. I mean, I've been, pretty careful about that for a number of years. And that is one of the things that I would say is a benefit to a tuned and balanced room. My monitoring system, and I'm sure yours is just like that. It's not harsh. And so I don't feel like I get that ear fatigue, like I used to in studios where monitoring really was pretty harsh.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing about it is I can turn it down low and still hear clearly what's going on with a lot of stuff. I mean, there's still a difference for me between what the music and the mix sounds like to me at a low volume versus a volume that's pushing some energy out. And I do need to hear them in both places, but it's nice to be able to do a lot down low. And there's a lot of what I have to do that doesn't require critical listening too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's a very good point. I don't listen loud on this stuff that's not critical listening. The stuff where I'm just cleaning up tracks, editing, just kind of generally getting some things plugged in. I don't burn myself out on that at all. The only time I really start to listen loud is just to kind of check it and see, like when you crank it up loud, if someone end user is going to listen to something you did loud, is it going to be smooth, And so I try to think of it that way.
Yeah, I find sometimes I turn it up loud and things that are harsh become immediately evident to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, you're killing me, Lidge, or the vocal level might strike me as too quiet or too loud or something like that too.
Yeah, that's one of the things actually. I don't know really what constitutes a great mix other than it just needs to move you and feel good. But I guess if we're going to have some criteria for it, it would be, smoothness, balance of instruments, lows, mids, highs. If I turn something up loud and it's still smooth, that to me is, a more expensive sounding mix.
Mm-hmm.
There's some records that, I've put on, and even if I just really crank them up, I mean, it's just everything is so smoothly EQ'd and everything. It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't feel that. It's not distorted. It's not harsh. Doesn't mean that you have to listen loud all the time. It just means that it's just something to be aware of. Because other than the fact that I think, everybody should, music is art, and mixing is an art form, and it should every song should be different. Every artist should be different. But yeah, there is a way to attain like some clarity and smoothness that I think, is universal. I think that always just makes a record a better record.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I know that for me, sometimes the challenge is realizing the difference between that arriving at that smoothness through all the knob turning that I'm doing in the mix stage versus having put down the right sound in the first place onto tape. And that can be a real balancing act.
Yeah, no, that is to me the most important part of all of this is, if you have the ability to record things really well, it still can be different sounds and taste and everything. But when you have the ability to record things really well, then the mixing is going to be better, and that's one of the luxuries that you have if you're working with real professionals. I mean, real seasoned pros and everything. And meaning that if I'm mixing something that was performed by really great musicians, it's already going to be a big step up before I even ever get it,
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, most of the time, the stuff I mix, I don't really have to go in and rebuild, the sound of instruments, and that makes it, more pleasant too, really, because mixing to me should be the craft of just creating this environment. Do you want it to be a soft environment like a coffee house, or do you want it to be a stadium, or do you want it to be real dry, real reverb? All those things come into play, but I really don't want to go in and have to take a really poorly sounding drum recording or something and try to build it into something. Although I've had to do that, but I'm saying, but that's not my idea of a good time.
Right on. Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free." Well, let's talk about one last aspect of this, the stereo bus. What are some things that you find useful as far as what goes on your stereo bus in Pro Tools, if that's where your bus processing happens? And then do you use things like Pro Tools Heat ever, or tape plugins, or any of those kind of things to kind of recreate what you might have experienced on an analog mix?
On occasion, it's just kind of, I might try like a tape machine on the stereo bus, and if I like it, I'll stick with it. And sometimes I think I don't need it. One thing I've really been trying even on my own here is to back off some. I've gone back, a lot and listened to older recordings, older records, things that I've done, things that other people have done. And I realized that when the stuff that I really love the way it sounds, in my studio, it was before we had all this processing. And in fact, it's kind of funny. I'm going to I'm having a song transferred this is kind of related, then I'll get into the stereo bus thing. I'm having a song transferred that from analog to digital that I recorded and mixed in 1983 with a guy named Gary Muledeer, and a documentary's being done about him and his 50-year career or however it goes back, and he's still going strong. He's a comedian, musician, and if you haven't heard of Gary Muledeer, he's been around a very long time. He's pretty well known. But we had recorded this song, and in 1983, it was at Lion Share Studios, which was Kenny Rogers Studios in Los Angeles, and the film company wanted to know if we could, give them stems of some things that they could use just for different aspects. So, of course, we didn't have any stems. We'd done this in 1983. So I said, the only way I could accommodate this is to transfer the analog tape, which, they located, to digital. And then I can create, do a remix and then create stems. Well, then I listened to it and I realized that I don't think I should try to remix it. I think I should just try to create stems that are real close to what the components of the mix are, because the mix of the record sounds really pristine, really clean and clear. And I was looking at the track sheet and realized, well, maybe one of the reasons it sounds so pristine and clear is we recorded it on an API desk, and the whole production with strings and everything was 21 channels total on a 24 track. And when I mixed it, I'm sure I didn't run it through anything on the stereo bus. It was just mixing from the API desk to a 3M, probably even a 1/4-inch machine at that time. It was either a 1/2-inch or a quarter. No, probably would have been a 3M 1/4-inch, tape machine. And I thought, wow, it just sounds so big and clear, in my system. And, I was thinking even stuff that I've done more recently, if I start getting too crazy with processing and putting too much on the stereo bus, I'm actually choking it down, even though it gets louder, with the, limiting and everything. It doesn't fill the room, the same way.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, usually what I'll do is I'll get about 2/3 of the way into what I think is a good balance of the mix. And then I'll attempt to put some things on the stereo bus to do a little bit of kind of pre-mastering, you might say. And sometimes that could be a tape machine emulator. I've dabbled with Heat on Pro Tools on occasion. I'll on occasion I'll try maybe a Neve compressor or an API compressor, or I'm just thinking just different things that I may have.
Got any favorite Neve plugin compressor plugins?
I always forget the number of this. Was the 8268 or something? The Neve. I used to have an analog piece of that.
I know the 33609. The big
33609 is what I'm. I'd have to look at it to tell you the number, but that's one that I favor a lot, and occasionally I'll put that on a stereo.
Is that
bus.
A universal audio version of that or something?
I have a universal audio version of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right
on. And some of these things I have, a couple things, like I've got some, Waves, SSL stuff and API stuff. And then I've also got universal audio, API stuff and Neve stuff and all that too. But I'll end up usually with something on the 2 bus, and it may be 1, 2, or 3 things, just depending on, what I think is adding to it. And then if I start to feel like I'm going the wrong direction, I'll slap my hand and say I don't really have to put anything on the stereo bus. But that brings up another, aspect of mixing today. One of the things is we tend to want to be somewhat competitive with the other music that's out there. And in my opinion, a lot of what's out there today is over compressed, over limited.
My mix might be.
What's that?
I said my mix might be.
Yours might, well,
the one I did last night.
Okay, but I do feel that that's kind of, it's gone in a direction that I don't really think is better.
Right. No.
But having said it, so I know I need to be competitive too. Okay, this is a different time, and I also know that my clients have to be happy. So if I leave them a mix that, say, I don't put anything on the stereo bus, but I think that the balances are good and reverb's good and tones, everything's really good, I know when I send it to them, they're going to probably think, oh, it doesn't sound as big as whatever else it is that they're listening to. And I could say to them, well, we're going to get it mastered, and I'll let the mastering engineer do all that. But it's going to be, it's hard for people to visualize that, Mm-hmm. The other thing I don't like to do is and I know this gets done too, but I think it's a little confusing for mastering engineers. I do like to get all my stuff professionally mastered, by the way. So that it doesn't always happen, but I really push for having what I mix go to a pro mastering engineer, even if they do very little. Just that little bit that they do in their own system and their own ears, to me, is worth it. But I don't like to put a bunch of stuff on the stereo bus, send it to my client, and then to make them happy, and then take it all off and send it to a mastering engineer, because I think that puts the mastering engineer at a disadvantage. Because now my client is like the fact that I, put an L2 or something, waves L2 or L3 across the stereo bus and just, cranked it up so it got 10 dB louder, and then my client's getting used to that, and the mastering engineer's thinking, well, I could have made it a better sounding record, but now they're in love with this. And so what I try to do is I try to find that what I think is a happy medium of, I'll put a little bit of bus compression, maybe some slight limiting, maybe a tape, saturation on the stereo bus, and then I feel like there's room for a mastering engineer to take it to a slightly higher level. But in the meantime, it's heated enough that my clients probably think it sounds competitive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with you that, every mastering engineer I talk to, they want to know what the artist has been listening to anyway.
Yeah, so I always send the mastering what the artist approved. Okay, but I do feel that I have to put something on the stereo bus I always call those heated mixes, to heat it up a little bit, so that they're going to be happy. And then hopefully, my mastered engineer doesn't call me back and say, thanks, it's a brick wall, I can't do anything with it, But, so I just try to find that place. And then, and that seems to work pretty well. But yeah, generally I do put, some processing on the stereo bus. But again, if I go back to work I did 25 years ago, I probably did none.
That's great. I love it. Well, Bob, we're coming to the end of the podcast interview, but I want to ask you one last question that I've asked you before, and I'll ask it again now. We get to take this one's hypothetical. We get to take the Wayback Studio machine. And I don't know how far you want to go back. You could decide, but you go back in time and you find yourself at an earlier point and you say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself later on. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself about, I don't know, making records, your career choices, this whole analog to digital transition, any of those things?
Well, I think some of the things that worked for me was, my enthusiasm and passion for this stuff. So, especially in my earlier days of being an apprentice engineer and assistant and all that, I spent countless hours doing some of the things we've already talked about, trying different microphones, trying different things, bringing people in, not even with the idea of having to make a record, but let's just go through all the, the points, and just experiment. So then later when I'm doing something that is, we're on the clock, we got to make fast decisions and everything, I've, developed a toolbox. I think that's important. When I had opportunities to do overdubs, with a new client or maybe someone, just suggested they use me. I did, contrary to where I kind of said something a little different earlier probably, but I did try to make the best, rough mix for them I possibly could, so that maybe they'd go home and listen to it and go, oh, wow, we need to get this guy to mix this for us, So he did, those are things that I think are crucial. I think it's very important to embrace the changes in technology and be excited about it. And then, so much of what we do is just how we work with people, working with musicians and singers. And if you're engineering for, another producer, really kind of, understanding what it is that they're hoping that you're going to bring to the table. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I certainly love to embrace the enthusiasm. I mean, just having this podcast for me is an expression of that too, getting an opportunity to talk to you and so many other guests and be able to just get excited about hitting the studio. Sometimes I have to remind myself there's a difference between talking about it, Lidge, and getting down there and plugging in some mics. So that's always a good reminder too, taking that time when you're not under the gun for a session to go try everything out and see what it does. Don't erase over somebody's master tracks by accident, but do plug in the microphones and listen to them. But don't turn on the phantom power when you plugged in the ribbon mic, and don't disconnect the tube mic while the power is still on.
That's just learning your tools like any other trade. We learn our tools, and I feel, I'm sure you're the same way. I can just hear it in your voice, and the fact that you do all this, I get just as excited to walk into a recording studio to work with someone as the very first time I ever walked into a studio, and I often thought, gosh, if I didn't have that, then I shouldn't. That's the day I need to stop, But I had someone a long time ago kind of point out. They said, most people can't wait to get home from work so they can, have a life. And, what I have to say about you is you can't wait to go to work.
I know the feeling, man.
And I try to keep a balance. Don't get me wrong. I have other interests too, and I try to keep a balance of all that. But thank goodness, being called to go, cut tracks with someone, Thursday or something isn't something that I dread. It's something like, oh boy, I get to go play in the sandbox another day,
Yeah, so. And I'm sure for you, like for me and others, one of the big differences is you're just as excited, but if you rewound back to the beginning, you would have also been getting no sleep and pulling your hair out with stress before the session the night before. And now you just go to sleep soundly and wake up and go to the session.
Yeah. In fact, part of that, which for everybody younger out there that's doing this, I'm happy for you. But, I used to just dream about, when I was under such high pressure on a lot of these sessions as a young person, the idea of being able to like undo something or, or crossfade or, in the days when all eyes are on you and you've got to punch in, like a piano or something where, it's almost impossible to make that sound transparent and everybody's just, watching, or you cut tape. And if you make a mistake, everybody's just, you can hear a needle drop in the room and, and now everything is like just undoable and you can rehearse it.
Yeah, you cut tape back in the day the wrong way, and that razor blade's headed for your jugular.
Yeah, exactly. So I can tell you some stories in another session about some real pressure moments with some big artists, hovering over you as you're doing something that you're thinking, please God,
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. We'll have to get back into some more stories next time you come back. Bob, thanks so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's been an absolute pleasure to hang out with you again. Please let the Rockstars know where they can go learn more about you, check out your studio online. If they're ready to make their next hit record, how should they try and get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, for me, bobbullock.net, that's my website. That pretty much connects you to, what I'm doing. And maybe not a lot of current examples on there because I don't really mess with it very much, but there's, All Music Guide is, I think, connected to that. And so that's probably the best resource, really. I do some mentoring, primarily mix, but, as I said, I, produce projects. It's just, I think that's the way to locate me is just through bobbullock.net.
Right on, man. Well, Bob, thanks again, man. It's great to hang with you. And I look forward to seeing you in person around the studio next time we're out and about.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Lidge. So thanks for inviting me. And I'll look forward to the next one.
All right, groovy, man. Thanks so much. And thanks for listening, Rockstars. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, and Isotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to access many of their plugins. At Sampley.app, sign up for a free account with 2 projects now, and later use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you upgrade to a pro account. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. You will find links to all these awesome sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in our next episode. Cheers.